The rope felt coarse against Adelaide Sinclair's neck. A bitter wind swept across the wooden platform, erected hastily before Clearwater's white-steepled church, making the gallows creak in protest. Sunday morning light cast long shadows across faces she had come to know over the past 2 years, now twisted with judgment and righteous certainty. Ada's gaze drifted skyward. The Montana morning was impossibly blue, the kind of sky that had first drawn her west from Boston. How strange that such beauty should frame her final moments. She closed her eyes, feeling the sharp bite of hemp against her throat as she swallowed. "Let us pray," came a voice from below. Ada opened her eyes. Cordelia Hayes stood at the front of the crowd, her spine rigid as a fence post, one hand clutching her leather-bound Bible as if it were a shield. At 65, her face was a roadmap of deep creases and harsh lines, her silver hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her skin. But it was her eyes that held Ada's attention, cold and unflinching, burning with conviction. "Heavenly Father," Cordelia's voice rang out across the gathering, "today we commit an act of justice. My daughter-in-law has poisoned my son, your faithful servant, Oliver, with her godless medicine. Today we return her to your judgment." The assembled townsfolk, dressed in their Sunday best, murmured their amens. Men in pressed suits and women in bonnets shifted uncomfortably, their Bibles clutched in white-knuckled hands. Children peeked around skirts and between legs, eyes wide at the spectacle. This wasn't the sermon they had expected after filing into church. Instead, they'd been led outside to witness divine justice. Sheriff Lawson stood to the side, hat in hand, his weathered face betraying nothing. He hadn't wanted this, but the town council, led by Cordelia's unwavering influence, had overruled him. "Does the condemned wish to confess her sins before meeting her Maker?" Cordelia's voice cut through the morning air. Ada lifted her chin, feeling the rope's burn intensify. "I did not poison Oliver," she said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "I loved my husband. I tried to save him." Cordelia's jaw tightened. The devil speaks through her even now. She turned to her elder son standing beside her. "Benjamin, as a man of God, what say you?" Benjamin Hayes, 35 years old and the town's preacher since his father's passing, stood silent for a long moment. His clerical collar seemed to constrict around his neck as he looked up at Ada, then back to his mother. His resemblance to Oliver was painful, the same strong jaw, the same thoughtful eyes. But where Oliver had been gentle, Benjamin had always been stern. "The Bible teaches us that the wages of sin is death," he finally said, voice hollow. "But it also teaches that judgment belongs to God alone." His eyes met Ada's briefly before dropping to the ground. "God works through his faithful," Cordelia countered sharply, "and we are his instruments today." Ada's mind drifted back away from the gallows to the first time she had seen Clearwater. It had been spring 1882. The stagecoach had rattled and bounced along the uneven trail, dust seeping through every crack and crevice. After 3 days of travel from the railroad station, Adelaide Sinclair was coated in a fine layer of Montana territory, but her spirits remained high. At 30 years old, with her nursing certificate from Boston Medical College and experience treating soldiers during peacetime, she was eager to put her skills to use where they were most needed. "Clearwater ahead, Miss Sinclair," the driver called down. The small town came into view, nestled in a valley between rolling hills. A church steeple rose above the other buildings, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. Ada smiled. It looked peaceful, exactly the kind of place that had been described in the advertisement seeking a trained nurse. The stagecoach rolled to a stop before the general store. Ada gathered her medical bag and stepped down her boots, landing on Clearwater's main street for the first time. The settlement was smaller than she had imagined, a single thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings. A smithy, a general store, a saloon, a small schoolhouse, and various other businesses made up the heart of town. "You must be our new nurse." Ada turned to find a man approaching, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a scholarly bearing, despite his evident weakness. His face was pale but handsome, with a neatly trimmed beard. "I am," she confirmed, extending her hand, "Adelaide Sinclair." "Oliver Hayes." His grip was firm despite his frail appearance. "Son of Reverend Hayes. I've been corresponding with the medical board about bringing a trained nurse to Clearwater." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hayes. I understand you have medical training yourself." A shadow crossed his features. I studied at Harvard Medical for 2 years before illness called me home. Now I do what I can to help our town, though it's hardly enough." He gestured toward the end of the street. "I've arranged temporary lodging for you at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house until more permanent accommodations can be found." They began walking slowly, matching Oliver's measured pace. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what are the most pressing medical needs in Clearwater?" "Everything from childbirth to mining accidents," he replied. "But I'm afraid many here still cling to old ways. My mother, for instance." He stopped himself, then continued carefully. "She believes strongly in traditional remedies passed down through generations." "Folk medicine can be valuable," Ada offered diplomatically. "Many modern treatments originated from traditional practices." Oliver gave her a curious look. "Yes, but science must evaluate which practices help and which harm. That's something I hope to contribute before." He gestured vaguely at his weakened state. "What ails you, if I may ask?" "A wasting illness. Doctors in Boston could find no cause. My mother believes it was testing my faith." A wry smile touched his lips. "I believe there's a perfectly rational explanation, though it eludes me." They reached the boarding house, a two-story structure with a small porch. "Miss Sinclair," Oliver said, turning to face her fully, "I should warn you that not everyone in Clearwater welcomed my request for a trained nurse. Some, including my mother, believe modern medicine interferes with God's will." Ada smiled confidently. "I've faced resistance before, Mr. Hayes. People fear what they don't understand. But when they see results, minds can change." Oliver nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "I hope you're right, for all our sakes." Within 6 months, Adelaide Sinclair had become simply Nurse Ada to most of Clearwater. She had delivered babies, set broken bones, treated mining injuries, and helped ease the passing of the elderly. Many who had initially viewed her with suspicion now sought her care. But not Cordelia Hayes. The Reverend's widow maintained a chilly distance, continuing to distribute her homemade remedies and blessed tonics throughout the community. When townsfolk fell ill, they often found themselves choosing between Nurse Ada's science and Mrs. Hayes's spiritual cures. And then there was Oliver. His condition fluctuated. Some weeks he seemed almost recovered, walking through town with newfound energy. Other weeks found him bedridden, barely able to lift his head. During those dark days, Ada would visit the Hayes home only to be turned away at the door by Cordelia. "My son is receiving proper care," the older woman would say, her voice like steel. "He needs prayer and rest, not your newfangled treatments." Despite this resistance, or perhaps because of it, Ada found herself drawn to Oliver. His intellect remained sharp even as his body betrayed him. They would spend hours discussing medical journals he still received from the East, debating new theories and treatments. It was during one such discussion, sitting on the Hayes front porch, while Cordelia was at a church meeting, that Oliver took Ada's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft but steady, "about us." Ada felt her heartbeat quicken. "Have you now? You've brought light to Clearwater, Ada. Not just medical knowledge, but a different way of seeing." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I find myself looking forward to your visits more than anything else." "Your mother would never approve," Ada whispered, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. "I'm 32 years old," Oliver replied with a hint of steel in his voice. "I respect my mother, but I won't let her dictate my happiness." His eyes met hers. "If you'd consider it, I'd like to court you properly." 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at the church. Benjamin officiated with visible reluctance. Cordelia attended in black, as if at a funeral rather than her son's wedding. But nothing could dim the joy Ada felt as she and Oliver began their life together. For a time, it seemed Oliver's health improved. Ada implemented a careful regimen of nutrition and moderate exercise. She monitored his symptoms meticulously, keeping detailed notes. But whenever Cordelia insisted on administering her family tonic, a dark liquid she claimed had sustained Hayes men for generations, Oliver would inevitably worsen. "Please let me analyze the tonic," Ada begged one evening after Oliver had spent the day feverish and in trembling. "Analyze?" Cordelia scoffed from where she sat at Oliver's bedside. "This is not some chemical concoction to be dissected, Adelaide Penetruan. This is a blessed remedy passed down through 5 generations of Hayes women sanctified by prayer and scripture." "But it's making him worse," Ada insisted. "Look at him. He was improving until he started taking it again." Blasphemy, Cordelia hissed. His weakness comes from doubt, from turning away from faith toward your science. She stood drawing herself up to her full height. This tonic saved his father during the war. It brought Oliver himself through scarlet fever as a child. The Hayes men have always needed its strength. Oliver stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Mother Ada, please. Both women fell silent. Ada, he said weakly, my mother means well. The tonic is tradition. Oliver, please. He cut her off with a slight shake of his head. I'll continue with both approaches. Your treatments and mother's tonic. Peace between you is what will help me most. Against her better judgment, Ada reluctantly agreed, but she began to notice patterns. Oliver would improve under her care, then decline sharply after Cordelia's visits with the tonic. The cycle repeated with devastating consistency. 6 months into their marriage, Ada slipped into Oliver's study while he rested. She had never invaded his privacy before, but desperation drove her now. Searching through his medical books, she found a journal wedged between 2 volumes. Heart pounding, she opened it to find Oliver's careful handwriting. April 15th, 1883. I have begun to suspect something terrible. The symptoms I've been experiencing, tremors, weakness, confusion, deterioration of gums align with descriptions of chronic mercury poisoning. But from where Ada's treatments contain no mercury compounds. April 20th, 1883. I've sent a sample of Mother's tonic to Dr. Ezra Montgomery in Helena for analysis. I pray I'm wrong. May 10th, 1883. Doctor, Montgomery's results confirm my fears. The tonic contains alarming levels of mercury, likely from cinnabar in the sacred red clay, Mother adds. Does she know, could she possibly know what she's doing to me, to father before me? To grandfather, Ada's hands trembled as she read on. May 15th, 1883. I cannot bring myself to tell Mother. This tonic has been the Hayes family tradition for generations. Her mother-in-law taught her to make it as her mother was taught before. To reveal the truth would destroy her. She truly believes she is saving me. May 17th, 1883. I've begun discreetly disposing of the tonic when she's not looking. My symptoms have improved slightly. Ada notices but attributes it to her treatments. I cannot tell her either. She would insist on confronting Mother, and I cannot bear the thought of that conflict. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks prior, made Ada's blood run cold. June 1st, 1883. My condition worsens despite my precautions. I fear Mother has noticed me disposing of the tonic and has begun adding it to my food. If something happens to me, I worry for Ada. Mother will never accept that her beloved remedy could be responsible. She will seek another explanation, another culprit. God forgive me for my cowardice in not stopping this cycle, for not speaking the truth while I still can. Ada closed the journal, her mind reeling. Mercury poisoning. Of course, all the symptoms aligned perfectly, and Oliver had protected his mother at the cost of his own life. The sound of Cordelia's voice in the hallway startled her. Ada quickly replaced the journal and slipped out of the study, her heart hammering against her ribs. How could she save Oliver without destroying Cordelia? What would he want her to do 2 weeks later? Oliver Hayes died in his sleep. Ada, who had been keeping a vigil by his bedside, stepped out briefly to make fresh tea. When she returned, his breathing had stopped. She screamed, then a primal sound of grief and rage that brought Cordelia running from her room down the hall. What have you done? Cordelia shrieked, pushing past Ada to reach her son. Oliver, Oliver! She pressed her fingers to his neck, searching frantically for a pulse that was no longer there. He's gone, Ada whispered, tears streaming down her face. I stepped out for just a moment. You killed him, Cordelia said, her voice suddenly calm and cold. You poisoned my son. No, Ada protested. I tried to save him. I've been trying all along. Search her things, Cordelia commanded, as Benjamin appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. Search her medical bag. You'll find the poison she used. Mother, Benjamin began, but Cordelia cut him off. Do it now, before she can dispose of the evidence. In a daze of grief, Ada didn't resist as Benjamin reluctantly went through her medical supplies. She was thinking of Oliver's journal, of his suspicions, of his protection of his mother, even at the cost of his own life. Here, Cordelia said, suddenly pulling a small brown bottle from Ada's bag. Mercury, the very poison that took my son. She held up the bottle triumphantly. Ada stared in confusion. That's not mine. I don't use mercury compounds in my treatments. It's far too dangerous. Lies, Cordelia spat. You've hated our ways from the beginning. You turned my son against his faith, against his family's traditions. And when he wouldn't abandon them completely, you killed him. That bottle is not mine. Ada repeated, a chill creeping up her spine as she realized what was happening. Someone put it there. Benjamin held the bottle, looking from his mother to Ada with confusion etched on his features. Mother, are you certain? I saw her with it, Cordelia insisted, measuring doses when she thought no one was watching. She turned to Ada, her eyes burning with grief and rage. You'll hang for this. God's justice will be done. Within hours, Adelaide Sinclair was locked in Clearwater's small jail, charged with the murder of her husband. Now, 3 days later, she stood on the gallows. The town gathered to witness her execution. No formal trial, no opportunity to present evidence. Just Cordelia's accusation and the town's hunger for swift justice. Proceed, Cordelia commanded, nodding to the executioner, a reluctant stable hand who had been pressed into service. The man moved toward the lever that would open the trap door beneath Ada's feet. His face was pale, his movements hesitant. Ada closed her eyes, thinking of Oliver, of the child growing within her, a secret she had only confirmed the morning after his death, a child who would never draw breath. Stop! The command rang out across the churchyard. Heads turned as a horse and rider galloped up the main street, coming to a dust-swirling halt before the gallows. The rider dismounted with surprising agility for a man of his years. He was tall and lean, with a shock of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Though he must have been 70, he carried himself with the bearing of a much younger man. This execution cannot proceed, he announced, striding toward the platform. Who are you to interfere with our justice? Cordelia demanded, stepping forward to block his path. The man regarded her steadily. Dr. Ezra Montgomery, formerly of the Union Army Medical Corps, presently of Helena. He turned to address the sheriff. I have evidence pertinent to the death of Oliver Hayes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The sheriff stepped forward, clearly relieved at the interruption. What kind of evidence, Doctor? Medical evidence, Montgomery replied. Evidence that proves Adelaide Sinclair is innocent of her husband's death. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a folder of papers. I demand a proper hearing before a judge, immediately. We don't need an outsider's opinion, Cordelia said sharply. The evidence of her guilt is clear. Is it? Montgomery challenged. Was there an autopsy, a proper toxicology analysis, or merely an accusation from a grieving mother who found a conveniently placed bottle of poison? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Benjamin Hayes stepped forward, his face troubled. Perhaps we should hear what the doctor has to say, Mother. Cordelia's face flushed with anger. You too, Benjamin. You would betray your brother's memory. I want justice for Oliver, Benjamin replied quietly. True justice. If this man has evidence, we are bound by Christian duty to consider it. Ada watched the exchange from the gallows, hardly daring to breathe. Dr. Montgomery, the same doctor Oliver had sent his sample to. He had come just as Oliver feared might be necessary. Sheriff Lawson cleared his throat. I reckon we can reconvene at the town hall. Judge Harrison can hear the evidence and make a proper ruling. This is a farce, Cordelia protested, a delay of God's will. But the mood of the crowd had shifted. The spectacle of a hanging had been one thing, but the arrival of a distinguished doctor with evidence gave them pause. No one wanted an innocent woman's blood on their hands. Cut her down, the sheriff ordered. We'll do this proper according to law. As the rope was removed from around her neck, Ada caught Dr. Montgomery's eye. He gave her a slight nod, his expression grave but reassuring. Thank you, she whispered as she was led past him toward the town hall. Don't thank me yet, he murmured. We still have a battle ahead. Judge Harrison was not pleased to have his Sunday interrupted. A heavy-set man in his 60s with jowls that quivered when he spoke, he made no effort to hide his annoyance as he took his seat at the front of the town hall. This had better be important, he grumbled, adjusting his spectacles. I was in the middle of dinner. The town hall was packed, every bench filled, and people standing along the walls. News of Dr. Montgomery's dramatic intervention had spread quickly, drawing even more spectators than the aborted hanging. Your Honor, Sheriff Lawson began, we have new evidence in the matter of Adelaide Sinclair's alleged poisoning of her husband, Oliver Hayes. Alleged, Cordelia interrupted from her seat in the front row. She was caught red-handed with the poison order, Judge Harrison said without much conviction. Let's hear this evidence and be done with it. He looked expectantly at Dr. Montgomery. Well, doctor, what's so important you had to stop a duly approved execution? Montgomery stepped forward, placing his folder on the table before the judge. Your Honor, I have evidence that Oliver Hayes died of chronic mercury poisoning, but not at the hands of his wife. Preposterous, Cordelia called out. We found mercury in her medical bag. Convenient, wasn't it? Montgomery replied coolly. Tell me, Mrs. Hayes, did you search for the poison before or after your son died? After, of course, she said, when I realized what she'd done. And yet, Montgomery continued, I have here correspondence from your son dated 6 weeks before his death, expressing concern that he was suffering from mercury poisoning. He extracted a letter from his folder and handed it to the judge. Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles again and read aloud, Dr. Montgomery, I write seeking your expertise on a matter of grave concern. I believe I may be suffering from chronic mercury poisoning, though the source eludes me. As the judge continued reading, Ada watched Cordelia's face. The older woman's expression remained defiant, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. When Judge Harrison finished reading, Montgomery continued, Following this letter, Oliver Hayes sent me a sample for analysis. It was labeled Family Tonic. My tests revealed dangerous levels of mercury, likely from cinnabar red mineral ore often used in folk remedies. Gasps and whispers filled the town hall. Cordelia rose to her feet. Lie. My tonic is a blessed remedy that has sustained Hayes men for generations. Science doesn't lie, Mrs. Hayes, Montgomery replied gravely. Mercury is a potent poison when ingested regularly. It causes tremors, confusion, deterioration of the gums, weight loss, all symptoms your son exhibited. If what you say is true, Judge Harrison interjected, why would Mrs. Sinclair have mercury in her possession? I didn't, Ada spoke up from where she sat guarded by the sheriff. That bottle was planted in my bag. I've never used mercury compounds in my treatments. Any medical professional knows how dangerous they are. A convenient defense, Cordelia scoffed. Actually, Montgomery said, it's easily verified. The bottle found in Mrs. Sinclair's bag, may I see it? The sheriff produced the small brown bottle that had been entered as evidence. Montgomery examined it briefly, then nodded. As I suspected, this is mercuric chloride commonly used as a disinfectant in some medical practices. But Mrs. Sinclair, as a modern nurse, would use carbolic acid instead. Would you not? Ada nodded. Yes, carbolic acid is much safer and more effective. I've never purchased or used mercuric chloride. Furthermore, Montgomery continued, this bottle has no prescription label, no proper medical marking. It's the type sold for industrial purposes or found in home remedy kits. He looked directly at Cordelia, like the one I observed in your kitchen when I arrived, Mrs. Hayes. Benjamin Hayes had been sitting silently throughout the proceedings, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Now he stood, his voice barely audible. Mother, is this true? Did your tonic contain mercury? My tonic contains sacred red clay, blessed by prayer as it has for generations. Cordelia replied, her voice shaking slightly. If there is mercury in the clay, I had no knowledge of it. Ignorance doesn't change the outcome, Montgomery said gently. Mercury poisoning is well documented in medical literature. Your son recognized the symptoms in himself, likely because he had medical training. If what you say is true, Benjamin pressed, then father. Yes, Montgomery nodded gravely. I treated Reverend Hayes 15 years ago during his final illness. The symptoms were identical. I suspected mercury poisoning then, but couldn't prove it without knowing the source. A heavy silence fell over the town hall. Cordelia sank back onto the bench, her face ashen. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Dr. Montgomery, are you suggesting that Mrs. Hayes deliberately poisoned her son and husband? No, Your Honor, Montgomery replied. I believe Mrs. Hayes administered what she genuinely thought was a beneficial remedy, one passed down through generations, its dangers unknown to those who prepared it. The poisoning was accidental, born of ignorance rather than malice. But the mercury in Mrs. Sinclair's bag, the sheriff began, was planted, Montgomery finished, either to frame her or because someone truly believed she was responsible for symptoms they couldn't explain. All eyes turned to Cordelia, who sat rigid, her hands clutching her Bible. "I found the bottle in town," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "After Oliver died. I I put it in her bag while she was with the body. I knew she had killed him with her foreign ways. I needed proof." Ada felt a surge of both vindication and pity. "I didn't kill him, Mrs. Hayes. I tried to save him." "Your treatments weren't working." Cordelia shot back, a flash of her former fire returning. "He kept getting worse. Because he continued taking your tonic," Montgomery explained gently, "even as he suspected what it contained." "Why would he do that?" Benjamin asked, bewildered. Before Montgomery could answer, Ada spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Because he loved his mother. Because he couldn't bear to tell her that the family tradition she cherished was killing him." She looked directly at Cordelia. "He protected you until the end." A strangled sound escaped Cordelia's throat, not quite a sob, not quite a protest. Benjamin moved to his mother's side, placing a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Judge Harrison cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn of the proceedings. "Well, it seems we have a case of wrongful accusation here. Mrs. Sinclair, you are cleared of all charges in the death of your husband." He banged his gavel with finality. "This hearing is adjourned." As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the shocking revelations, Ada remained seated, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The reprieve from death had left her drained, the grief she had suppressed in her fight for survival, now washing over her in waves. Dr. Montgomery approached, offering his hand. "Mrs. Sinclair, I apologize for not arriving sooner. The letter requesting my testimony arrived only yesterday." "Letter?" Ada asked, confused. "I sent no letter." Montgomery frowned, then glanced toward Benjamin Hayes, who was guiding his mother toward the door. "It appears you had an advocate you didn't know about." Ada followed his gaze. Benjamin caught her eye briefly before looking away, guilt evident in his expression. "Come," Montgomery said gently. "You need rest and nourishment, especially in your condition." Ada's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "How did you go out?" "I'm a doctor, Mrs. Sinclair," he said with a small smile. "I observe. That and you have been unconsciously protecting your abdomen throughout the proceedings." His expression softened. "Oliver's child." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "No one knows yet. I only confirmed it the day after he died." Montgomery offered his arm. "Then we have all the more reason to ensure your well-being. I have a room at the hotel. We can discuss your future once you've rested." As they stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight, Ada paused, looking back at the church, where the gallows still stood, a grim reminder of how close she had come to death. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," Montgomery replied, "we ensure the truth is fully revealed, not for vengeance, but to prevent this tragedy from repeating." He patted her hand reassuringly. "You're not alone, Mrs. Sinclair. Not anymore." That night, in the safety of the hotel room Montgomery had arranged for her, Ada finally allowed herself to weep for Oliver, for the child who would never know its father, and for a family tradition that had poisoned 3 generations of good men. Outside her window, Clearwater settled into an uneasy Sunday evening, the town's certainties shaken to their foundations. In the Hayes household, Benjamin knelt beside his mother's bed, praying for guidance, the journal he had discovered, hidden in his brother's study, lying open beside him. And in his own room at the hotel, Dr. Ezra Montgomery wrote by lamplight, documenting everything he had learned about the blessed tonic that had claimed too many lives already. He had failed to save Reverend Hayes and his son, but perhaps he could still save others from the same fate. The truth, bitter as medicine, had begun to do its healing work. Thank you for providing such a detailed outline for Bitter Medicine, the Truth Unveiled. I've written the first part, 6,000 words, based exactly on your enhanced outline, maintaining the Western setting historical period and all the character dynamics you specified. Morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Ada's hotel room, casting delicate patterns across the worn floorboards. She had slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by the scratch of rope against her throat and Oliver's pale face. Each time she woke, the relief of being alive washed over her anew, followed swiftly by grief that threatened to pull her back under. A gentle knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Mrs. Sinclair, it's Dr. Montgomery." Ada smoothed her hair and adjusted her borrowed nightgown, provided by Martha Wilson, the hotel owner's wife, who had been horrified to learn of Ada's near execution. "One moment, please." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. Dr. Montgomery stood in the hallway, medical bag in hand, his expression kind but concerned. "I hope I didn't wake you," he said. "I thought you might appreciate a check of your condition after yesterday's ordeal." Ada stepped back to allow him entry. "Thank you, doctor. I admit my neck is rather sore." Montgomery nodded grimly. A common complaint among those who survived the noose, though thankfully few have cause to make it. He set his bag on the small table by the window. "Please sit. I'd like to examine the bruising." As the doctor's gentle fingers probed the angry red line that circled her throat, Ada studied him more carefully than she had been able to the day before. His hands were steady despite his age, his eyes clear and observant. There was a quiet dignity about him that reminded her of the better physicians she had worked with in Boston. "The tissue damage is superficial," Montgomery said after a moment. "Apply cold compresses today, then warm ones tomorrow. It should heal completely within a week or two." He stepped back, his expression softening. "Now about your other condition. How far along are you?" Ada's hand went instinctively to her abdomen. "Perhaps 6 weeks. I only confirmed it after Oliver." Her voice faltered. "Have you experienced any spotting cramping?" She shook her head. "No, despite everything the child seems determined to hold on." "Good." Montgomery nodded approvingly. "You need proper nutrition, rest, and most critically peace of mind." He began repacking his medical bag. "I've spoken with Sheriff Lawson. The charges against you have been formally dropped, but Cordelia Hayes still believes I killed her son," Ada finished. "Yes, and while many in town now doubt her accusation, tensions remain high." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "Mrs. Sinclair, I believe it would be prudent for you to leave Clearwater, at least temporarily." Ada stared at him. "Leave, but where would I go? My position here, my home." "All can be reclaimed once tempers cool," Montgomery assured her. "I'm returning to Helena this afternoon. You'd be welcome to accompany me. I maintain a small clinic there where your skills would be invaluable." The offer was tempting. Helena was a proper city with courts and authorities who wouldn't allow a woman to be hanged on mere accusation. Yet something held her back. "I can't run away," she said finally. "If I leave now, Cordelia's version of events, however discredited, will linger. The truth about the tonic might be buried." She placed her hand protectively over her stomach. "And my child deserves to know its father wasn't killed by its mother." Montgomery studied her for a long moment. "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Sinclair. Foolhardy perhaps, but brave." A hint of admiration flickered in his eyes. "Very well. If you're determined to stay, we should prepare for the battle ahead." "What battle?" "The one between science and superstition, between fact and belief." Montgomery moved to the window, gazing out at the town coming to life below. "Mrs. Hayes's tonic hasn't just killed her son and husband. If my suspicions are correct, it's been poisoning Hayes men for generations, all in the name of healing." Ada joined him at the window. "You mentioned that yesterday. How could such a tradition continue if it killed those it claimed to cure?" "Because the poisoning was slow and insidious. Mercury doesn't kill immediately, it accumulates in the body over months or years." He sighed heavily. "And when death finally came, it was attributed to the original illness, not the purported cure." "A perfect circle of tragic logic," Ada murmured. "Indeed, and breaking such circles requires more than just scientific proof." Montgomery turned to face her. "It requires changing beliefs held sacred for generations." Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. This time it was Sheriff Lawson, hat in hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sinclair," he began awkwardly, "I've come to offer the town's, well, my apologies for yesterday's proceedings." He twisted his hat brim nervously. "Things got out of hand. Proper procedure wasn't followed." "Out of hand is a rather mild way to describe an attempted execution without trial," Montgomery remarked dryly. Lawson flushed. "Yes, well, the town council has called an emergency meeting this afternoon. Judge Harrison wants both of you there." He glanced at Ada. "And Mrs. Hayes, of course." "To what end?" Ada asked. "To determine what happens next, I reckon." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "There's talk of charges against Mrs. Hayes for false accusation and, well, for what happened to her son." Ada felt a stab of unexpected pity for Cordelia. She didn't know what her tonic contained. She genuinely believed it was healing him. Ignorance doesn't absolve responsibility, Montgomery said quietly, though it may mitigate punishment. The meeting's at 2 o'clock, Lawson said, backing toward the door. I'd advise coming early. Half the town will be trying to squeeze in. He nodded awkwardly and departed. Montgomery closed the door behind the sheriff. It seems our battle begins sooner than expected. He glanced at Ada. Are you up to this? Ada squared her shoulders. I've faced worse in the last 24 hours, Doctor. I think I can manage a town meeting. The town hall was indeed packed to capacity by the time Ada and Dr. Montgomery arrived. Whispers followed them as they made their way to the front where 2 chairs had been reserved. Judge Harrison sat at the center of a long table flanked by the 5 members of the town council. Benjamin Hayes occupied one end, his clerical collar stark against his black coat. Ada scanned the room for Cordelia, but didn't see her among the assembled townsfolk. She'll make an entrance, Montgomery murmured, seeming to read her thoughts. People like Mrs. Hayes understand the power of timing. As if on cue, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Cordelia Hayes entered dressed in morning black, her spine ramrod straight despite the events of the previous day. The crowd parted to let her pass, many nodding respectfully, others watching with uncertainty. Judge Harrison called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. Folks, we're here to address the matter of Oliver Hayes' death and the subsequent events. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. In light of Dr. Montgomery's evidence, it appears a grave injustice was nearly committed. Objection! Cordelia's voice rang out as she reached the front of the room. This meeting is a farce. The real injustice is allowing my son's murderer to walk free based on the testimony of an outsider. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harrison banged his gavel again. Mrs. Hayes, you'll have your turn to speak. But I remind you that formally accusing Mrs. Sinclair again could constitute slander given yesterday's findings. Cordelia's eyes narrowed, but she took her seat opposite Ada, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Now then, Harrison continued, Dr. Montgomery has presented evidence suggesting that Oliver Hayes died from chronic mercury poisoning, likely from a medicinal tonic regularly administered by his mother. He adjusted his spectacles. The question before us is twofold. Was this poisoning deliberate, and what action, if any, should the town take in response? Montgomery rose. If I may, Your Honor, I'd like to present additional evidence that may clarify the first question. Harrison nodded. Proceed, Doctor. From his bag, Montgomery produced a leather-bound book. This is a medical text on toxicology published in 1875. It clearly establishes the dangers of mercuric compounds, including their presence in certain folk remedies. He placed it on the judge's table. I've also brought laboratory analyses of the sample Oliver Hayes sent me 6 weeks before his death. He handed several papers to the judge, who examined them with a frown. These chemical terms mean nothing to me, Doctor. They demonstrate conclusively that the tonic contained dangerous levels of mercury, Your Honor. Levels that with regular consumption would cause exactly the symptoms Oliver experienced. Montgomery turned to face the crowd. I believe Cordelia Hayes had no knowledge of these dangers. The tonic was a family tradition passed down through generations. Pure speculation, Cordelia interjected. You never even met my son until after his death. Actually, Mrs. Hayes, I treated your husband during his final illness 15 years ago. Montgomery's voice remained even. His symptoms were identical to your son's. I suspected mercury poisoning then, but couldn't identify the source. A murmur ran through the crowd. Benjamin Hayes leaned forward, his expression troubled. You treated father, I don't recall. You were away at seminary, son, Cordelia cut in sharply. This man came once, and your father sent him away. His remedies were useless. I was sent away, Montgomery corrected, after suggesting that the Reverend's condition might be caused by something in his daily regimen. Something like a tonic. The tension in the room thickened. Ada watched Benjamin's face, saw doubt creeping into his features as he looked at his mother. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Dr. Montgomery, are you suggesting that the same tonic may have been responsible for Reverend Hayes' death as well as his son's? I am, Your Honor, and possibly others before him. The Hayes family has a documented history of wasting illness in its male line. I believe this is no coincidence. Cordelia surged to her feet. This is blasphemy. Our family tonic is a blessed remedy, sanctified by prayer passed from mother to daughter-in-law for 5 generations. Her voice shook with emotion. My husband and son died because it was God's will, not because of some poison. Science doesn't contradict faith, Mrs. Hayes, Montgomery said gently. It simply reveals God's natural laws. And one of those laws is that mercury, when ingested, is toxic to the human body, regardless of the prayers said over it. Enough, Cordelia's face had flushed deep red. I will not sit here and listen to this heresy. She turned to the council members. Gentlemen, you knew my husband. You know me. Would I harm my own flesh and blood? The council members shifted uncomfortably. One, a white-haired man Ada recognized as the town banker, spoke up. No one's accusing you of deliberately harming anyone, Cordelia. But if the tonic contained this, mercury, then perhaps unknowingly. The tonic healed generations of Hayes men, Cordelia insisted. Any weakening came from turning away from faith from God's path. She pointed an accusing finger at Ada. She turned Oliver from the old ways, filled his head with modern notions. If he weakened, it was because his faith weakened. Ada had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now she spoke, her voice quiet yet clear. Oliver never lost his faith, Mrs. Hayes. He simply recognized that God gave us minds to understand his creation, including the effects of certain substances on the human body. Don't you dare speak of my son's faith, Cordelia hissed. I was his wife, Ada replied evenly. I knew his heart. You knew nothing. You were married mere months. I carried him in my body, nursed him through childhood. Illness taught him to pray. And poisoned him with your tonic, Ada finished softly. Without meaning to, without knowing, but the result was the same. A shocked silence fell over the hall. Even Cordelia seemed momentarily struck speechless by the directness of Ada's words. Into the silence, Benjamin Hayes rose slowly from his seat at the council table. I have something to add to these proceedings, he said, his voice strained. Something I discovered last night. All eyes turned to the preacher. He held up a small leather notebook. This is Oliver's personal journal. I found it hidden in his medical texts. His hand trembled slightly. In it, he documents his suspicions about the tonic and his decision to continue taking it despite those suspicions. Cordelia stared at her surviving son. You went through Oliver's private things. How dare you? I was searching for the truth, Mother. Benjamin's voice cracked slightly. A truth I think Oliver wanted found eventually. May I see this journal, Reverend Hayes? Judge Harrison asked. Benjamin handed it over, avoiding his mother's gaze. Harrison opened the journal to a marked page and began reading aloud. May 20th, 1883. Dr. Montgomery's results confirm my fears. The tonic contains alarming levels of mercury. I've suspected for weeks that my symptoms match those of chronic mercury poisoning, but I couldn't bring myself to believe Mother's remedy could be the cause. Now I know. Cordelia shook her head in denial, but Harrison continued. I cannot tell her. The tonic is more than medicine to Mother. It's her connection to a family tradition, stretching back to her mother-in-law and beyond. It's her expression of love and faith. To tell her that this tradition has been slowly killing Hayes men for generations would destroy her. Ada felt tears welling in her eyes. Oliver's words confirmed what she had already known in her heart. He had protected his mother to the end at the cost of his own life. I've tried disposing of the tonic secretly, but my condition continues to worsen. I fear Mother has noticed and has begun adding it to my food. Ada suspects something but attributes my decline to the original illness. I cannot bring her into this painful secret. She would insist on confronting Mother, and I cannot bear to witness that conflict. Harrison looked up, his expression somber. The final entry is dated 2 days before his death. He adjusted his spectacles and read on. I know now I will not recover. Too much damage has been done. I've written to Dr. Montgomery requesting he come to Clearwater after my passing. The truth must be known, not to punish Mother, but to prevent this tragedy from claiming more lives. I fear for Ada when I am gone. Mother will never accept that her beloved remedy could be responsible. She will seek another explanation, another culprit. God forgive me for my cowardice in not stopping this cycle sooner. A single strangled sob broke the silence that followed. All eyes turned to Cordelia, who sat rigid in her chair, her face ashen. Lies, she whispered, but the word held no conviction. He couldn't think such things. Benjamin moved to his mother's side, kneeling beside her chair. Mother Oliver knew. He knew, and still he took the tonic because he couldn't bear to hurt you, even as it was killing him. No, Cordelia shook her head, her denial weakening. The tonic heals. It always has. My mother-in-law taught me to prepare it, just as her mother-in-law taught her. The ingredients seemed harmless, Montgomery said gently. Clay from the creekbed, herbs from the hills blessed with prayer. But that red clay contains cinnabar mercuric sulfide. When prepared as a tonic and ingested regularly, it releases mercury into the body. I didn't know, Cordelia whispered, her composure finally cracking. How could I know it was tradition? Sacred tradition. Of course you didn't know, Montgomery assured her. None of the Hayes women knew. They were passing down what they sincerely believed was a healing remedy. Ada watched as Cordelia's certainty crumbled. The older woman's shoulders sagged, the rigid spine that had carried her through decades of hardship finally bowing under the weight of terrible understanding. Oliver, she moaned, a sound of pure maternal anguish. My boy, what have I done? Benjamin embraced his mother as she began to weep, harsh, raw sobs that seemed torn from the depths of her being. The sight stirred something unexpected in Ada's chest. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a profound sadness. Here was a woman who had devoted her life to faith and family only to discover that her most loving act had been unknowingly destructive. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional display. In light of this evidence, it's clear that Oliver Hayes' death, while tragic, was not the result of deliberate action on anyone's part. He looked around the hall. This council finds Adelaide Sinclair completely exonerated of any wrongdoing. And my mother, Benjamin asked, still holding the weeping Cordelia. Harrison exchanged glances with the other council members before continuing. While Mrs. Hayes' actions in falsely accusing Mrs. Sinclair are serious, they appear to have stemmed from grief rather than malice. Given the unusual circumstances, this council recommends no criminal charges be filed. Relief washed over Benjamin's face. Thank you, Your Honor. However, Harrison continued sternly, the council does order that all remaining quantities of the Hayes family tonic be surrendered for disposal and that the formula not be prepared again. He looked directly at Cordelia. For the safety of this community, Mrs. Hayes. Cordelia nodded weakly, beyond resistance now. This matter is closed, Harrison declared, bringing down his gavel with finality. May God grant peace to all concerned. As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the shocking revelations, Ada remained seated. The vindication she had hoped for felt hollow in the face of Cordelia's grief. What good was being right when it brought such pain to another? Dr. Montgomery touched her shoulder gently. You should rest, Mrs. Sinclair. This has been trying for everyone, but especially for you in your condition. Ada nodded, rising slowly. As she turned to leave, her gaze met Benjamin's over his mother's bowed head. His eyes held a complex mixture of sorrow, gratitude, and something else, perhaps respect. Mrs. Sinclair, he called softly. A moment, please. Ada approached hesitantly as Benjamin helped his mother to her feet. Cordelia wouldn't meet Ada's eyes, her face tear-streaked and hollow with shock. I want to apologize, Benjamin said formally, for my part in what nearly happened yesterday. I should have questioned Mother's accusations more thoroughly. You believed you were seeking justice for your brother, Ada replied. I understand loyalty to family. Still, I was wrong. He glanced at his mother, who stood like a ghost beside him. We were both wrong, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive. Before Ada could respond, Cordelia finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, but suddenly clear. I killed my son, she said, her voice flat with terrible realization. And my husband before him, with love, with faith, with a tradition. She laughed, a brittle, broken sound. What a perfect instrument of the devil to turn a mother's love into poison. Mrs. Hayes, Ada began, but Cordelia continued as if she hadn't heard. She straightened slightly, some of her old dignity reasserting itself. I cannot undo what I've done, Mrs. Sinclair, but I withdraw my accusations completely. You did not kill my son. I did. With that, she turned and walked stiffly toward the door, leaning heavily on Benjamin's arm. The remaining townspeople parted to let them pass, their expressions a mixture of pity, shock, and lingering respect for a family pillar now broken. Montgomery watched them go. A powerful woman even in defeat. She'll never recover from this, Ada murmured. Perhaps not completely, but humans are remarkably resilient, Mrs. Sinclair. Even in our darkest moments, we find ways to continue. He offered her his arm. Come, you've had enough excitement for one day. As they stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, Ada was struck by how ordinary the town looked. The same buildings, the same dusty street, yet everything had changed. Her reputation was restored, but at what cost? A family destroyed, a tradition revealed as deadly faith shaken to its foundations. What happens now, she asked, echoing her question from the day before. Now, Montgomery replied, the healing begins. For everyone. That night, Ada sat alone in her hotel room, a blank sheet of paper before her. She had intended to write to her family in Boston to explain everything that had happened, perhaps to explore the possibility of returning east. But the words wouldn't come. How could she possibly explain the events of the past few days? How Oliver had died, how she had nearly followed him, how his mother had almost become her executioner, all because of a family tonic prepared with love and prayer. Soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Benjamin Hayes standing awkwardly in the hallway, hat in hand. Reverend Hayes, she said, surprised. Is everything all right? No, he answered honestly. But I didn't come about that. May I speak with you briefly? Ada hesitated, then stepped back to allow him entry. Benjamin remained standing just inside the door, unwilling or unable to make himself comfortable in her room. How was your mother? Ada asked. Broken. His voice was flat. Dr. Montgomery gave her something to help her sleep. I've asked Mrs. Wilson to sit with her tonight. I'm sorry, Ada said and meant it. Benjamin nodded acknowledgement. I came because there's something else you should know. He twisted his hat brim nervously, something Oliver told me before he died. Ada's heart quickened. What is it? The night before he passed, when Mother was at prayer meeting, I sat with him. He was very weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. Benjamin's voice grew softer. At one point, he looked directly at me, clearer than he had been in days, and said, Take care of Ada and the child, Benjamin. Promise me. Ada's hand went instinctively to her stomach. He knew. I thought he was delirious, Benjamin admitted. But now I wonder if perhaps he sensed it somehow. He looked at her directly. Are you with child, Mrs. Sinclair? For a moment, Ada considered denying it. But what was the point? The truth would become obvious in a few months regardless. Yes, she said simply, though I only confirmed it after Oliver died. He never knew for certain. Benjamin nodded slowly. Mother doesn't know either. Not yet. I think it might be best if she didn't learn of it immediately. In her current state, I understand, Oda assured him, but eventually, eventually, yes. A grandchild might be the one thing that could bring her back from this darkness. He hesitated. Which brings me to my purpose in coming here tonight. The Hayes home, it's your home too, by right. Oliver would want you to live there to raise his child there. The offer took Ada by surprise. I'm not sure that would be wise. Your mother and I need time and space, yes, Benjamin agreed. But the house is large. Mother could take the east wing, you the west. You wouldn't need to interact beyond what's comfortable. He twisted his hat again. It's what Oliver would have wanted. Ada considered the proposal. The Hayes home was indeed spacious, a testament to Reverend Hayes' standing in the community, and it would provide stability for her and the child. Yet the thought of living under the same roof as Cordelia, even in separate wings. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I need time to consider it. Everything has happened so quickly. Benjamin nodded. Of course, it's not a decision to make hastily. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Sinclair. I sent for Dr. Montgomery after finding Oliver's journal. I want you to know that. Ada stared at him, comprehension dawning. You're the reason he arrived when he did. You saved my life. A flush crept up Benjamin's neck. I merely sought the truth. Once I read Oliver's suspicions about the tonic, I knew something was terribly wrong with Mother's accusations. He looked down. I should have acted sooner. I almost didn't act in time. But you did, Ada said softly. Thank you. After Benjamin left, Ada returned to her blank paper. But instead of writing to her family in Boston, she began a different letter, one to Oliver, telling him of the child growing within her, of the truth that had been revealed of her uncertainty about the future. She knew he would never read it, but somehow putting the words on paper helped order her thoughts. I don't know if I can live with your mother even in separate wings of the house, she wrote, but I also don't know if I can deny our child its heritage, its connection to you. What would you advise, my love? What is the right path forward? There would be no answer, of course. Oliver was gone and she would have to find her own way. But as she wrote, she felt a measure of peace stealing over her, the first real peace she had known since his death. Outside her window, a full moon rose over Clearwater, bathing the small town in silver light. In the Hayes house across town, Cordelia tossed fitfully in drugged sleep, her dreams haunted by visions of the tonic that had become her family's curse. In his sparse room behind the church, Benjamin knelt in prayer, wrestling with questions of faith and science that had never before troubled him. And in the room adjacent to Ada's, Dr. Montgomery carefully documented everything he had learned about the Hayes family tonic, determined that this particular tradition of poisoning would end here in this generation. Too many had died already from well-intentioned ignorance. If he had his way, Oliver Hayes would be the last. The truth had been unveiled, bitter as medicine. Now came the long process of healing for Ada, for Cordelia, for the entire community, touched by this tragedy. It would not be easy or quick. Real healing never was. But as Ada finally set down her pen and prepared for sleep, she placed a protective hand over her abdomen, where Oliver's child grew a new life, untouched by the poisons of the past, full of possibility. There at least was hope. In the quiet darkness of her room, Ada whispered the promise that would carry her forward. Your father will be remembered not for how he died, little one, but for the truth he helped reveal, a truth that will save lives. She closed her eyes, feeling Oliver's presence surrounding her like a blessing. And that is a legacy worth carrying on. Morning came to Clearwater with the gentle persistence of seasons changing. 1 week had passed since the town hall meeting, where Oliver's journal had been read aloud, where Cordelia Hayes had finally understood the terrible truth of what her family's tonic had done. The town had settled into an uneasy quiet, the scandal neither forgotten nor openly discussed, but hovering in sidelong glances and hushed conversations that ceased when certain people approached. Ada found herself in a strange limbo. No longer accused of murder, she was free to resume her life, yet everything had changed. Her patients trickled back hesitantly, first those who had never fully believed her guilt, then others whose need for medical care eventually outweighed their lingering doubts. Dr. Montgomery had extended his stay, taking a room at the hotel for research purposes, though Ada suspected he remained primarily out of concern for her. His presence was a comfort, a connection to the medical world she had left behind in Boston, and a shield against the still wary looks of some townsfolk. On this particular morning, Ada sat in her small rented room, Oliver's wedding band threaded on a chain around her neck, sorting through her limited possessions. She had yet to return to the Hayes home to collect the rest of her things, unsure of her welcome and reluctant to face Cordelia again. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Sinclair, Mrs. Wilson's voice called through the wood. There's someone here to see you. Ada opened the door to find Mrs. Wilson, the hotel owner's wife, standing beside a young girl of perhaps 12 years, clutching a cloth-wrapped bundle. This is Lily Thornton, Mrs. Wilson explained. Her mother's taken ill, and she's asked for you specifically. Ada knelt to the girl's height. Hello, Lily. What's troubling your mother? She's got the fever, something awful, Lily replied, her eyes wide with worry. Pa's away at the lumber camp, and Mama said not to fetch Dr. Montgomery because we can't afford his city prices. She said to ask if you'd come instead. Ada glanced at Mrs. Wilson, who nodded encouragingly. Of course I'll come. Let me get my bag. As she gathered her medical supplies, a small warmth kindled in Ada's chest. Rebecca Thornton had been one of her first patients in Clearwater, a difficult birth successfully delivered. That she would ask for Ada now, despite everything that had happened, meant something. The Thornton cabin lay at the edge of town, a modest but well-kept structure surrounded by a small vegetable garden. Inside, Rebecca Thornton lay on a bed in the main room. Her face flushed with fever, her breathing labored. Mrs. Thornton, Ada said gently, placing a cool hand on the woman's forehead. It's Nurse Ada. Can you hear me? Rebecca's eyes fluttered open. You came, she whispered, relief evident in her voice. Of course I came. Ada began her examination, noting the telltale rash spreading across Rebecca's chest, the swelling of the lymph nodes in her neck. How long have you been ill? 3 days, Rebecca managed. Started with a sore throat, then the fever. Lily hovered anxiously nearby, watching Ada's every move. Is Mama going to die? Not if I can help it, Ada replied with more confidence than she felt. Your mother has scarlet fever. It's serious but treatable. She turned to Rebecca. I'll need to bring Dr. Montgomery. This requires more than I can provide alone. Fear flickered in Rebecca's eyes. We can't afford. You'll afford what's necessary to save your life, Ada said firmly. Dr. Montgomery isn't as expensive as you fear, and you have a daughter who needs her mother. Rebecca closed her eyes in surrender. All right, Ada turned to Lily. I need you to be very brave. Run to the hotel and ask for Dr. Montgomery. Tell him I've diagnosed scarlet fever and need his assistance immediately. Can you do that? Lily nodded solemnly and dashed out the door. Ada turned back to her patient, dampening a cloth to place on Rebecca's forehead. Why me? She asked quietly as she worked. After everything that happened, there are those in town who still believe that you killed your husband. Rebecca's laugh turned into a cough. Not me. Never believed it. Why not? Saw how you looked at him. Rebecca's fever-bright eyes fixed on Ada. Woman who loves like that doesn't poison. And, she paused for breath. Always thought Mrs. Hayes's tonics were suspicious. My grandmother took one for her heart. Died 2 months later. Ada's hands stilled momentarily. Did many in Clearwater take Mrs. Hayes's remedies? Mostly the Hayes family. Few others. Rebecca's eyes drifted closed. Reverend insisted. Said it was women's wisdom blessed by God. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place in Ada's mind. The Hayes family tradition had remained primarily within the family, with only occasional outsiders affected. No wonder the pattern hadn't been more widely recognized. By the time Dr. Montgomery arrived, Ada had made Rebecca as comfortable as possible and had begun boiling water to sterilize equipment. Excellent preliminary work, Montgomery commented after examining the patient. Your diagnosis is correct. We'll need to isolate Mrs. Thornton from her daughter, maintain hydration, and begin a course of sodium salicylate for the fever. Together, they established a treatment protocol, with Ada agreeing to return that evening to relieve Montgomery. As they stepped outside to allow Rebecca to rest, Montgomery regarded Ada thoughtfully. You handled that situation with remarkable composure, Mrs. Sinclair. Many in your position might have hesitated to answer such a call given recent events. I'm a nurse doctor. That doesn't change regardless of what else happens. She gazed back at the cabin. Besides, it feels good to be useful again. Montgomery nodded, understanding in his eyes. The best cure for grief is purpose. And speaking of purpose, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I've received a reply to my inquiry about establishing a proper clinic in Clearwater. The Montana Medical Society is prepared to provide modest funding on one condition. What condition? That a qualified physician commits to a minimum 2-year residency. He watched her reaction closely. I'm too old to relocate permanently, but I've recommended you for the position with the proviso that you complete your medical certification under my supervision. Ada stared at him in astonishment. Me? But I'm not a physician, I'm a nurse. With more practical experience than most first-year doctors, Montgomery countered. You've demonstrated exceptional diagnostic skills, surgical assistance, and patient care. The society is willing to waive certain requirements given the desperate need for medical professionals in these territories, provided you pass the appropriate examinations. A woman doctor in Clearwater. Ada shook her head. The town would never accept it. They accepted a woman nurse readily enough. And after recent events, I think many here have learned not to dismiss scientific training so easily. He smiled slightly. Besides, Mrs. Thornton isn't the only one who never believed you guilty. You have more supporters than you realize. The possibility unfurled before Ada like a map to an unexpected destination. To become a physician, to fulfill the dream she had once dismissed as impossible for a woman from her modest background, was tantalizing. Yet the path would be difficult, especially in Clearwater, with its complicated history and her own complicated future. I need time to consider, she said finally. With the baby coming. Of course, Montgomery agreed. The offer stands whenever you're ready. The examinations wouldn't take place until next spring at the earliest, giving you time to recover from childbirth. He glanced at the son's position. I should return to Mrs. Thornton. Will you be all right getting back to town alone? I've walked these roads many times, Doctor. I'll be fine. As Montgomery returned to the cabin, Ada began the walk back to Clearwater, her mind swirling with possibilities. A physician's training would secure her future and her child's, providing them independence, regardless of where they ultimately settled. But it would also tie them to Clearwater for at least 2 years, to the place where Oliver had died, where she had nearly been executed, where Cordelia Hayes still lived with her grief and guilt. Lost in thought, Ada almost didn't notice the approaching wagon until it was nearly upon her. She stepped aside to let it pass, then recognized the driver. Mrs. Sinclair, Benjamin Hayes called, reining in his horses. I was just coming to find you. Ada regarded him warily. Though Benjamin had helped save her life by summoning Dr. Montgomery, their relationship remained complicated. He was, after all, still Cordelia's son. Is something wrong? She asked. Not wrong exactly. He climbed down from the wagon. But I need to speak with you about Mother. She's not well. A flutter of anxiety passed through Ada. Is she ill? Do you need Dr. Montgomery? Not that kind of unwell. Benjamin removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. She hasn't left her room in a week. Barely eats. Speaks to no one, not even me. Just sits in her chair by the window, staring at nothing. His troubled eyes met Ada's. I fear for her mind, Mrs. Sinclair. I'm sorry to hear that, Ada said sincerely, but I'm not sure what I can do. I doubt my presence would comfort her. Actually, that's why I've come. Mother has asked to see you. At Ada's look of disbelief, he added quickly, it's the first thing she's requested in days. I couldn't refuse. Ada hesitated. The thought of facing Cordelia again stirred a complex mixture of emotions, pity, lingering fear, and a strange sense of obligation. After all, this woman was her child's grandmother, however estranged they might be. Very well, she said finally. I'll come, but I can't stay long. I'm due back at the Thornton place this evening to relieve de Montgomery. Benjamin's relief was palpable. Thank you. I've brought the wagon. He stopped, noticing her medical bag. Were you attending to someone? Rebecca Thornton has scarlet fever. Dr. Montgomery and I are treating her. A shadow crossed Benjamin's face. Mrs. Thornton has always been kind to Mother. I'll include her in the parish prayers. He helped Ada into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. I should warn you, Mrs. Sinclair. Mother is changed. The woman you'll see today is not the same one who stood before the gallows. As the wagon rolled toward the Hayes house, the house that should have been her home, with Oliver, Ada steeled herself for whatever awaited. The Hayes residence stood on the outskirts of town, a handsome two-story structure built when Reverend Hayes had first established Clearwater's church 20 years earlier. Ada had lived there briefly after marrying Oliver, but it had never felt truly like home. Cordelia's disapproval had permeated every room, every meal, every conversation. Now, as Benjamin helped her down from the wagon, the house seemed diminished somehow. Still physically imposing, but spiritually hollowed out. The curtains were drawn despite the fine weather, and the garden, once Cordelia's pride, showed signs of neglect. She's in her sitting room, Benjamin said softly as he led Ada inside. The same place she's been since the meeting. The house was unnaturally quiet, dust motes dancing in the few shafts of sunlight that penetrated the gloom. Ada followed Benjamin up the stairs to the east wing, Cordelia's domain, where Ada had rarely been welcome. He knocked gently on a door at the end of the hallway. Mother, I've brought Mrs. Sinclair as you asked. There was no response. After a moment, Benjamin opened the door. The sitting room was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the midday sun. A single shaft of light cut through where the curtains didn't quite meet, illuminating dust particles in the air. In this slender beam sat Cordelia Hayes, motionless in a high-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. The change in her was shocking. The formidable woman who had once dominated every room she entered had become a hollow shell. Her face was gaunt, her once immaculate hair hanging limp and untended, her black dress wrinkled as if she had slept in it. But most disturbing was her stillness, a quality of absolute immobility that seemed more suited to a wax figure than a living woman. Mother, Benjamin said gently, Mrs. Sinclair is here. Slowly, as if waking from a deep trance, Cordelia turned her head. Her eyes, once sharp with certainty, were dull and unfocused until they landed on Ada. Then a spark of recognition flared. You came, she said, her voice a rasping whisper from disuse. You asked for me, Ada replied simply. Cordelia nodded once, then looked at her son. Leave us, Benjamin. He hesitated. Mother, I don't think, leave us. There was a flicker of her old authority in the command. Mrs. Sinclair has nothing to fear from me now. Benjamin glanced at Ada, who nodded her assent. Reluctantly, he withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. For a long moment, the two women regarded each other in silence, the young widow and the older woman who had nearly caused her death. So much lay between them. Grief, accusation, revelation, regret. Where could they possibly begin? You look well, Cordelia said finally, despite everything. I can't say the same for you, Mrs. Hayes. A ghost of a smile touched Cordelia's lips. Always direct. Oliver admired that about you. She gestured to a chair opposite her own. Please sit. What I have to say may take some time. Ada sat cautiously, keeping her back straight, her hands folded over her medical bag in her lap, a shield of sorts, a reminder of her identity beyond this house and its tragedies. I've had a week to think, Cordelia began, her voice strengthening slightly with use. Not just about Oliver, but about my husband, my father-in-law, all the Hayes men. She stared at her hands, flexing them slowly as if testing their reality. The pattern was always there. The family weakness, we called it. But it wasn't weakness, it was poison administered by our own hands. Ada remained silent, sensing Cordelia needed to speak these truths aloud. The tonic became our identity, Cordelia continued. The Hayes women were known for their healing knowledge, their devotion to family. Our pride blinded us to what was happening before our eyes. She looked up, her gaze piercing. Pride, Mrs. Sinclair, is more dangerous than ignorance. At least ignorance can be educated. Ada remained silent, sensing Cordelia needed to speak without interruption. I hated you, the older woman continued matter-of-factly, from the moment Oliver brought you home. A modern woman with modern ideas, questioning traditions, suggesting improvements. Her mouth twisted in a bitter smile. You threatened everything I believed in, everything I had built my life upon. And when Oliver began improving under your care, it felt like a personal affront, a rejection of my ways, of me. I never meant to come between you and Oliver, Ada said. I only wanted him to get better. I know that now. Cordelia's hands tightened in her lap. But then, when he began declining again despite your treatments, it confirmed everything I believed, that modern medicine was useless, that only faith and tradition could save him. She laughed hollowly. All the while I was killing him with my blessed tonic, the very thing I believed would save him. She fell silent for a moment, lost in private torment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. Oliver loved you very much, Ada said gently, hoping to offer some comfort. Yes, Cordelia agreed, and look how I repaid that love. She traced the edge of her Bible with one finger. In the scriptures, there's a passage about having eyes, but not seeing, having ears, but not hearing. I've preached it my entire life without understanding that I was the very subject of the warning. She looked at Ada directly. Oliver sacrificed himself rather than shatter my faith in the tonic in myself. No mother should outlive her child, but to know I was the instrument of his death. Her voice faltered. There is no penance great enough for that. The raw anguish in her voice stirred Ada's compassion despite everything that had happened between them. He loved you, she said gently. He knew how important the family tradition was to you. He was protecting you in his way. And then I tried to kill you. Cordelia looked directly at Ada, her gaze suddenly clear and piercing. His wife, the woman carrying my grandchild. Ada stiffened in shock. How did you? A mother knows these things, Cordelia interrupted. Even a monstrous one like me. I saw the signs before Oliver died. The morning sickness, you tried to hide the foods you suddenly couldn't tolerate. Oliver noticed too. He was so happy. Her voice broke. Another life I would have destroyed with my blindness. Ada placed a protective hand over her still flat abdomen. Is that why you asked to see me, because of the child? Partly. Cordelia straightened in her chair, some of her old dignity reasserting itself. I asked you here to say 3 things, Mrs. Sinclair. First, to apologize, not that words can ever atone for what I did to you, to Oliver, to my husband. She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. Second, to tell you that I am leaving Clearwater. I've made arrangements to enter a convent in Helena, not as a nun, but as a penitent. I cannot live in this house, in this town, with these memories. A convent. Ada couldn't hide her surprise. Is that truly what you want? What I want no longer matters. It's what I need: silence, prayer, and distance from the harm I've caused. Her eyes held Ada's steadily. Which brings me to my third purpose. The house and everything in it will be yours, Mrs. Sinclair. Yours and the child's. Oliver would have wanted his son or daughter to grow up in the family home. Mrs. Hayes, I can't possibly accept. You can and you will. Cordelia cut her off with a flash of her old authority. I'm not giving you a choice. The papers have already been drawn up. Her expression softened slightly. Besides, where else would you go back to Boston as a pregnant widow? Stay in that hotel room indefinitely. This house should have been your home with Oliver. Let it be your home with his child. Ada was speechless. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had known of Cordelia Hayes, that she couldn't immediately process it. Benjamin knows, she finally managed. It was his suggestion. A hint of maternal pride crept into Cordelia's voice. My son is a better Christian than I ever was. He understands true penance. Ada's mind raced. The house would provide security for her and her child, a permanent home in Clearwater, with room enough for the clinic Dr. Montgomery had proposed. Yet accepting such a gift from Cordelia felt impossible after everything that had happened. As if reading her thoughts, Cordelia continued, Don't think of it as a gift from me, Mrs. Sinclair. Think of it as Oliver's legacy to his child. I am merely correcting a wrong, one of many I can never fully right. A knock at the door interrupted them. Benjamin entered, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry to intrude, but ours Montgomery has sent word. Mrs. Thornton's condition has worsened. He requests Mrs. Sinclair's immediate assistance. Ada rose quickly. I need to go. Cordelia nodded, retreating back into her strange stillness. Of course, your calling awaits. She looked up at Ada one last time. Will you consider what I've proposed? I will, Ada promised, though she had no idea what her answer would ultimately be. As Benjamin escorted her back to the wagon, Ada's mind whirled with the implications of Cordelia's offer and with concern for Rebecca Thornton. The day had taken so many unexpected turns that she felt disoriented, unmoored from the careful plans she had begun constructing for herself and her child. I gather Mother told you of her decision, Benjamin said as he helped her into the wagon. About the house, yes. Ada studied his face. You truly support this? I do. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. Mother needs to leave this place to find peace if she can. And you and the child need a home. He clicked to the horses, setting them in motion. It's what Oliver would have wanted. Those words again, Oliver's posthumous wishes becoming the compass by which they all navigated this uncharted territory. But what would Oliver truly have wanted? For his mother to exile herself to a convent in penance, for his wife to raise their child in the house where he had died. There was no way to know. The path to becoming Dr. Adelaide Sinclair proved more challenging than Ada had anticipated. For 6 months, while her body expanded with new life, her mind absorbed medical texts under Montgomery's tutelage. When Oliver Jr. was born a healthy boy with his father's contemplative eyes, Ada continued her studies during his naps, often falling asleep herself over anatomy drawings and pharmaceutical formulas. The Montana Medical Society initially balked at her application. A woman physician in a frontier town with an infant. The letters of rejection were politely worded but clear in their dismissal. Montgomery refused to accept defeat. He traveled to Helena personally, bringing Ada's meticulous case notes and research on mercury poisoning. Gentlemen, he told the board, you can recognize this exceptional mind now, or watch as medical history advances without you. When the board finally relented, allowing Ada to sit for the examinations, she faced another obstacle, the whispers of Clearwater residents who hadn't forgotten the scandal. That's the woman who nearly hanged, they'd murmur as she passed. Now she wants to be our doctor. The day of the examination, Ada left baby Oliver with Martha Wilson, kissed his downy head, and rode to Helena with Montgomery, her stomach in knots. For 8 hours, she wrote answers to questions about anatomy, physiology, pathology, and pharmacology. When asked about mercury poisoning during the oral examination, she spoke with such authority that one examiner removed his spectacles in surprise. Mrs. Sinclair, he said, Where did you acquire such specific knowledge? From bitter experience, sir, she replied steadily, and extensive research. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived bearing the society's seal. Ada opened it with trembling fingers, while Montgomery bounced Oliver Jr. on his knee. Well, the old doctor demanded. Ada looked up, tears welling in her eyes. I passed, with distinction. Montgomery's whoop of delight startled the baby, who began to cry. Ada laughed through her tears, taking her son in her arms. It's all right, little one, she whispered. Your mother is a doctor now. Your mother also mentioned she knows about the baby, Ada said carefully, watching Benjamin's reaction. He nodded. She suspected before everything happened. She told me after reading Oliver's journal. He mentioned it there, his hopes, his plans for the future. He knew. The realization sent a pang through Ada's heart. Oliver had known about their child, yet said nothing to her. I think he suspected just as mother did. He wrote of making the house ready for the little one to come. Benjamin glanced at her sympathetically. I'm sorry you had to learn of it this way. They rode in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Benjamin spoke again, his voice hesitant. Mrs. Sinclair, I know you have no reason to trust either me or mother, but I hope you'll consider her offer. Not for her sake or even mine, but for the child's. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. A Hayes child should be raised in the Hayes home, knowing both sides of their heritage, the good and the difficult. Before Ada could respond, they arrived at the Thornton cabin, where Dr. Montgomery stood waiting on the porch, his face grave. I must go, she said, allowing Benjamin to help her down. Thank you for the ride. I'll return this evening to bring you back to town, he offered. However late you need. Ada nodded her thanks and hurried to join Montgomery, medical bag in hand. The Hayes house and all its complications temporarily set aside in favor of the immediate crisis before her. Rebecca Thornton's battle with scarlet fever lasted 3 grueling days and nights. Ada and Dr. Montgomery worked in shifts, applying cool compresses or to reduce fever, administering sodium salicylate for pain and inflammation, ensuring hydration and monitoring the infection's progression. At the worst moment, when Rebecca's fever spiked dangerously high and her breathing became labored, Ada sent Lily to fetch Benjamin. The girl needed spiritual comfort, while the adults feared the worst. Benjamin arrived promptly, gently leading Lily outside to pray, while Ada and Montgomery fought to stabilize her mother. We're losing her, Montgomery muttered, his fingers pressed to Rebecca's racing pulse. No, Ada said firmly, applying fresh cold compresses. We are not losing her. Lily needs her mother. She leaned close to Rebecca's ear. Fight, Rebecca. Your daughter is praying for you right now. Don't make her an orphan. Whether it was the aggressive treatment, Ada's fierce determination, or simply Rebecca's own will to live, the crisis passed. By morning, her fever had broken, and she slept peacefully for the first time in days. Excellent work, Mrs. Sinclair, Montgomery said as they stepped outside into the dawn light, exhausted but triumphant. Your instincts were spot on. We make a good team, Doctor, Ada replied, smiling tiredly. Indeed we do. He looked at her appraisingly. Have you considered my proposal about the clinic? Ada sighed, rubbing her eyes. I've hardly had time to think about anything beyond our patient. Of course, but the offer stands. He nodded toward Benjamin, who sat on a log with a sleeping Lily leaning against him. I see Reverend Hayes maintained his vigil as well. He's been unexpectedly helpful, Ada admitted. He brought us meals, comforted Lily, even helped change Rebecca's bedding when she was at her worst. People can surprise you, Mrs. Sinclair, especially in crisis. Montgomery patted her shoulder. Get some rest. I'll stay with Mrs. Thornton for now. Ada nodded gratefully and moved to where Benjamin sat. The preacher looked nearly as exhausted as she felt. His clerical collar wilted, his face stubbled with several days' growth of beard. Mrs. Thornton, he asked softly, careful not to wake Lily. The fever has broken. She'll recover. Ada sank down on the log beside him. Thank you for staying. Your presence comforted Lily greatly. It was the least I could do. He glanced at the sleeping child. She reminds me of myself at that age when my mother was ill with pneumonia. I remember the fear of possibly losing her. A rueful smile touched his lips. Ironic considering current circumstances. Life often is, Ada murmured. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun rise fully over the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the clearing. It struck Ada suddenly how strange this moment was, sitting peacefully beside the brother of her dead husband, the son of the woman who had nearly executed her, while a child who trusted them both slept between them. Life's complexity defied simple narratives. "You should know," Benjamin said eventually. "Mother leaves for Helena tomorrow. The convent has accepted her as a resident penitent." "So soon?" "She sees no reason to delay." He kept his gaze on the distant hills. "She's left a letter for you with the property deed and her formal retraction of all accusations. Whether you accept the house or not, she wanted to ensure your name was fully cleared." Ada thought of Cordelia sitting in that darkened room, planning her penance, arranging for the transfer of her beloved family home, the home she had expected to live in until she died, surrounded by children and grandchildren. "Will you go with her?" she asked. "Only to see her settled. My place is here with my congregation." He looked at her directly. "And with my brother's child, if you'll permit it." The request caught her off guard. "You wish to be involved in the child's life?" "I am its uncle, Mrs. Sinclair. The only blood relative it will have in Clearwater, perhaps the only one it will know at all." His expression was earnest. "I know our family's history is complicated, but I would very much like to be part of my niece or nephew's life." Lily stirred against Benjamin's shoulder, saving Ada from having to respond immediately. The girl blinked sleepily, then sat up straight. "Mama," she asked anxiously. "Your mother's fever has broken," Ada assured her. "She's going to be fine." Relief washed over Lily's face, followed by a radiant smile. "I knew God would answer our prayers. Reverend Bays," she turned to Ada, her eyes shining with admiration, "and I knew you and Dr. Montgomery would save her. You're like angels in human form." The girl's innocent faith in medicine both brought an unexpected lump to Ada's throat. Here was proof that the two needn't be at odds, that faith in science could work in harmony rather than opposition. Perhaps that was the lesson to take from all of this tragedy, that truth came in many forms, and wisdom lay in recognizing them all. "Can I see her?" Lily asked. "For a few minutes," Ada agreed. "Then she needs rest, and so do you." As Lily rushed inside, Benjamin turned to Ada. "I should return to town. Mother will need help with her final preparations." He hesitated. "Will you think about what I said, about being part of the child's life?" Ada nodded slowly. "I will, Reverend Hayes. But I need time to consider everything in the house, the clinic, your role in our lives. None of these are decisions to make while exhausted." "Of course." He rose, stretching stiffly after the long night. "I'll send the wagon for you this afternoon, or come myself if Mother can spare me." After Benjamin departed, Ada returned inside to check on Rebecca and Lily. The scene that greeted her, mother and daughter holding hands, whispering together, faces alight with love and relief, filled her with both joy and a poignant sense of what she herself had lost. Oliver would never see their child, never hold their hand, never whisper secrets and promises. Yet watching Rebecca and Lily, Ada felt something shift within her, a recognition that life continued, that healing was possible even after devastating loss. Rebecca had nearly died, but would now recover. Ada had nearly been executed, but stood here now, caring for patients, carrying new life within her. Perhaps she too could recover, not by forgetting Oliver or the trauma she had endured, but by building something new from the broken pieces. A home for herself and her child. A clinic to serve the community. A life of purpose and meaning. Dr. Montgomery glanced up from where he was checking Rebecca's pulse. "Everything all right, Mrs. Sinclair?" "Yes," she replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. "I think it will be." 3 weeks later, Adelaide Sinclair stood in the front parlor of the Hayes house, now her house, directing two young men from town as they positioned a new examination table near the windows. "A bit more to the left," she instructed. "I need good light for examinations." The men adjusted the heavy oak table, then stepped back for her approval. "Perfect," Ada said, smiling. "Thank you, gentlemen. That's all for today." As they departed, Dr. Montgomery entered from what had once been the formal dining room, but was now being converted into a dispensary. "The shelving is installed," he reported. "Once the cabinet maker finishes the medicine chest, we'll be ready to organize our supplies." He surveyed the transformed parlor with satisfaction. Clearwater's first proper medical clinic. Who would have thought? "Certainly not Cordelia Hayes," Ada remarked, running her hand over the smooth surface of the examination table. "Have you had any word from her?" "Benjamin received a letter yesterday. She settled into the convent, and has begun working in their infirmary under strict supervision, of course. Ada's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, where a small but distinct roundness had begun to show. She's asked for my forgiveness, formally, and for permission to correspond with the child when it's born. And will you grant these requests? Montgomery asked, watching her carefully. The forgiveness, yes. It serves no purpose to hold on to bitterness. Ada moved to the window, looking out at what was now her garden. The correspondence, perhaps in time. The child should know its grandmother, even if only through letters. Montgomery nodded approvingly. Wise decisions, Dr. Sinclair. The title still felt strange to Ada even 3 weeks into her formal training under Montgomery's supervision. I'm not a doctor yet. The examinations are months away. A technicality, he waved dismissively. You've shown more medical aptitude in 3 weeks than most of my students showed in a year. You'll pass the examinations with flying colors. I'd stake my reputation on it. Ada smiled at his confidence. Let's hope the Montana Medical Society shares your assessment of my abilities. They will, he assured her, especially after our successful treatment of the Thornton case. Speaking of which, he glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. Rebecca is due for her follow-up examination in about an hour. And I have 3 more patients scheduled after her, Ada added. Word is spreading about our clinic. As I knew it would, Montgomery's eyes twinkled. Nothing convinces skeptics like results, Mrs. Sinclair. The front door opened and Benjamin Hayes entered, carrying a wooden crate. The medical journals you ordered have arrived, Dr. Montgomery, he announced. The stagecoach brought them from Helena this morning. Excellent, Montgomery exclaimed. Set them in the study, would you? Mrs. Sinclair and I will sort through them later. Benjamin nodded and headed toward the back of the house where Oliver's study, now a medical library, was located. His presence in the house had initially been awkward, but over the past weeks a tentative routine had developed. He visited regularly, helping with the clinic's conversion, bringing news from town, sometimes simply sitting with Ada in the evenings, sharing memories of Oliver, or discussing the future of Clearwater. As Benjamin returned from the study, Ada noticed he was carrying something else, a small wooden box she recognized immediately. I found this while organizing the journals, he explained, holding it out to her. I believe it's yours. Ada took the box, running her fingers over the carved surface. Oliver had given it to her on their wedding day, a jewelry box that had belonged to his grandmother. Inside, she had kept her few treasures, her mother's cameo, her father's pocket watch, the pressed flower from her wedding bouquet. Thank you, she said softly. I thought it lost. Mother must have put it away after. Benjamin cleared his throat uncomfortably. There are likely other personal items you haven't located yet. Please don't hesitate to ask if you're looking for something specific. The mention of Cordelia no longer brought the immediate tension it once had. Time and distance were doing their work, softening the sharp edges of recent trauma, allowing a more nuanced perspective to emerge. Actually, Ada said, there is something I've been meaning to ask you. The family Bible, do you have it? Benjamin looked surprised. Mother took it with her to the convent. It was her most treasured possession. Why do you ask? I wanted to see the family records, births, deaths, marriages, to understand the pattern Dr. Montgomery mentioned. She glanced at the doctor. The generations of Hayes men who suffered similar symptoms. Ah, Montgomery nodded. Yes, that would be valuable research. Perhaps you could write to Mrs. Hayes and request she copy those records for you. Benjamin frowned slightly. For what purpose? Medical research, Ada explained. If we can document the pattern of mercury poisoning across generations, it could help prevent similar tragedies elsewhere. Folk remedies containing cinnabar aren't unique to your family, Reverend Hayes. Understanding dawned in Benjamin's eyes. You want to publish your findings? Eventually, yes, with all names changed, of course, to protect privacy. She hesitated, watching his reaction. Would that disturb you? Benjamin considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. If others can learn from our family's tragedy, then something good will have come from it. He straightened his shoulders. I'll write to Mother myself, requesting copies of the family records. Thank you, Ada said, genuinely moved by his willingness to expose such a painful chapter of his family history for the greater good. As Benjamin took his leave, promising to return the next day to help with more clinic preparations, Montgomery watched Ada thoughtfully. You're building something remarkable here, Mrs. Sinclair. Not just a clinic, but a bridge between worlds, between traditional community and modern medicine, between past and future. He smiled warmly. Oliver would be proud. I hope so, Ada replied softly, her hand moving to the slight swell of her abdomen. I want our child to be proud, too, of both sides of their heritage. The Hayes tradition of service to this community and my commitment to medical science. Montgomery nodded approvingly. A worthy legacy indeed. The grandfather clock chimed the hour, reminding them of the approaching appointments. As they moved to prepare for their patients, Ada paused at the window once more, looking out at Clearwater, the town that had nearly killed her, now the town she was committed to healing. The bitter medicine of truth had done its work. The Hayes family tonic would claim no more lives. Instead, a new tradition was beginning in the old Hayes house, one of healing based on knowledge rather than superstition, on science illuminated by compassion. Ada placed her hand on her growing abdomen, feeling the future stirring within her. Your father helped reveal an important truth, she whispered to her unborn child, and that truth will save lives for generations to come. That's the legacy you inherit, and the one we'll build together. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning, Ada stood on the front porch of the Hayes Sinclair Medical Clinic, watching her son Oliver Jr. carefully plant marigold seeds along the garden path. At 4 years old, he had his father's thoughtful eyes and his mother's determined chin, a perfect blend of both sides of his heritage. Not too deep, Ollie, she called gently. Remember what Uncle Benjamin taught you about planting? Just twice as deep as the seed is big. The boy recited, his small face serious with concentration. I remember, Mama. Ada smiled, pride warming her chest. Her son was growing into a remarkable child, curious, compassionate, and surprisingly wise for his years. Already he showed interest in both medicine and spirituality, spending hours at Ada's side as she treated patients, in equal time listening to Benjamin's Bible stories. Dr. Sinclair called Martha Wilson from the gate. The stagecoach just arrived. Your new assistant is here. Thank you, Martha. Ada brushed down her skirts and straightened the simple gold pendant she wore, Oliver's wedding band reset with a small ruby that matched their son's birthstone. Ollie, come meet our new nurse. The boy obediently set aside his gardening tools and took his mother's hand, his face alight with curiosity. Together they walked to the front gate just as a young woman descended from the stagecoach, medical bag in hand, looking around with nervous anticipation. Miss Peterson, Ada called, extending her hand in welcome. I'm Dr. Adelaide Sinclair. Welcome to Clearwater. The young woman, barely 21, fresh from nursing school in Chicago, smiled with relief. Dr. Sinclair, thank you for this opportunity. I can't tell you how excited I am to work at a clinic run by a woman physician. We're pleased to have you, Ada replied warmly. This is my son, Oliver. Hello, Master Oliver, Miss Peterson said, bending slightly to the child's level. Ollie regarded her solemnly for a moment, then asked, Do you know about mercury poison, Miss Peterson? The nurse blinked in surprise. Yes, we studied toxicology. Good, the boy nodded seriously. That's very important to know about. Mama wrote a book about it. Ada suppressed a smile. My son refers to my research paper on mercury and folk remedies. It was published in the Montana Medical Journal last year. She gestured toward the house. Come inside. I'll show you the clinic and your accommodations. As they walked up in the path with Ollie skipping ahead, Miss Peterson looked around appreciatively. The town seems lovely, so peaceful. It is now, Ada agreed, though it wasn't always. She paused, considering how much to share with her new assistant. Clearwater has had its share of darkness, Miss Peterson, but we've learned from it, grown from it. Like plants need both rain and sunshine, Ollie chimed in, demonstrating the wisdom that sometimes emerged unexpectedly from him. Exactly like that, Ada agreed, ruffling his hair affectionately. Inside the clinic hummed with quiet activity. Dr. Montgomery, now in his mid-70s, but still sharp as ever, was examining an elderly patient in one room, while Benjamin Hayes sat with a worried mother and her feverish child in another, offering comfort while they waited their turn. You've built something remarkable here, Miss Peterson observed, taking in the well-organized dispensary, the clean examination rooms, the waiting area where science textbooks shared shelf space with devotional literature. We all built it, Ada corrected gently. Dr. Montgomery, Reverend Hayes, the townspeople who came to trust us. She smiled at her son, who had climbed onto a stool to wash his hands properly before his afternoon snack, a ritual he never forgot, and the next generation who will carry it forward. That evening, after showing Miss Peterson to her quarters, Ada found a letter on her desk with the seal of the New England Journal of Medicine. She opened it curiously. She hadn't submitted anything to them. "Dear Dr. Sinclair," the letter began, "your paper on mercury poisoning from folk remedies, originally published in the Montana Medical Journal, has come to our attention. The documentation of intergenerational poisoning through traditional tonics is unprecedented in its thoroughness. We would like to republish your work in our upcoming issue with your permission." Ada sat down slowly, scanning the rest of the letter. The journal's editors mentioned 3 documented cases where physicians had identified similar poisonings after reading her research. Lives saved because she had turned tragedy into knowledge. She ran her finger over the embossed letterhead. When she'd first submitted her paper, Mercury and Folk Remedies, a generational study of unintentional poisoning, to the Montana Journal, she'd used the pseudonym A. Hayes Sinclair to honor both sides of Ollie's heritage. The editor had published it with her full name and credentials instead. "Your work deserves recognition," he'd written, "and the medical community needs more women's voices." Now that voice would reach across the country, perhaps even to Boston, where she had once been just another nurse discouraged from aspiring to more. She thought of Oliver and his journal entries, his careful documentation of symptoms, his analysis of the tonic's effects. In a way, this was his research too, their shared legacy. Later that evening, after Miss Peterson had been shown to her quarters and Ollie was tucked into bed, Ada sat at her desk reviewing patient notes. A knock at the study door revealed Benjamin holding a letter. "From Mother," he explained, placing it on the desk. "She asked me to ensure you received it." Ada nodded her thanks. Cordelia's letters came regularly now. Monthly correspondences filled with reflections, memories of Oliver, and increasingly questions about her grandson. Though they had met only once when Ollie was 2 years old, and Ada had cautiously agreed to bring him to Helena, Cordelia maintained a presence in the boy's life through her letters and the occasional handmade gift. "Will you answer?" Benjamin asked, as he always did. "Of course," Ada replied, as she always did. "Ollie enjoys her stories about his father as a boy." Benjamin smiled. The tension that had once characterized these exchanges long since faded. Over the years, they had developed a comfortable rapport, not quite friendship, but a mutual respect built on shared loss and shared purpose. "He asked Miss Peterson about mercury poisoning," Ada added with a slight smile. "Straight away before even asking her name." Benjamin laughed softly. That boy, so much like his father, always seeking knowledge. He paused, his expression growing more serious, and like his mother, unafraid of difficult truths. "Truth is like medicine," Ada replied. "Sometimes bitter, but necessary for healing." "Indeed." Benjamin moved to the door, then hesitated. "The baptism service for the Miller twins is Sunday after next." Ollie asked if he could attend. "Of course he may," Ada said. Though she didn't regularly attend church herself, she had never discouraged her son's interest in his father's faith. "He enjoys your services." "And I enjoy his questions." Benjamin's eyes twinkled. "He asked me last week if Jesus knew about germs. I told him Jesus created everything, including the things too small for us to see." Ada laughed. A diplomatic answer. After Benjamin left, Ada opened Cordelia's letter, prepared for the usual mixture of reminiscence and carefully worded inquiries about Ollie. Instead, she found something unexpected. "My dear Adelaide, I write with news that may bring complicated emotions. The Mother Superior believes my time in this world grows short. The physician confirms what I have suspected. My heart weakens daily. I have no fear of death. Indeed, I have come to see it as the natural conclusion to my penance. But I find myself with one remaining wish, to see Oliver's son once more before I go. To look upon his face and ask in person for the forgiveness I have sought these 5 years through letters. I understand if you refuse. You have shown more mercy than I deserved in allowing any connection at all. But I ask you to consider it not for my sake but for the boys. Every child should know from whence they came, even the difficult parts of that heritage. Whatever you decide, know that I remain. Gratefully yours, Cordelia Hayes." Ada opened her desk drawer and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay 24 letters neatly tied with blue ribbon, all from Cordelia to her grandson. She selected one from the middle of the stack, unfolding it carefully. "My dearest Oliver," it began in Cordelia's precise handwriting. Today I pressed wildflowers from the convent garden to send you. The blue ones are forget-me-nots. The sisters say they represent true love and memories. The yellow ones are buttercups your father used to hold them under his chin when he was your age, insisting they could tell if someone liked butter. The letter continued describing Oliver Sr.'s childhood adventures, his favorite hiding spots in the Hayes house, the time he'd rescued an injured hawk and nursed it back to health. No religious admonitions, no heavy-handed morals, just simple stories connecting a boy to the father he'd never known. Ollie treasured these letters. He kept them beside his bed and often asked Ada to read them at bedtime. "Tell me more about Papa," he would say, his small face serious in the lamplight. And through Cordelia's words, Oliver lived on not as the sick man Ada had watched fade away, but as a curious, kind-hearted boy who had grown into the man she had loved. The relationship between grandmother and grandson had developed entirely through these letters. The single meeting when Ollie was 2 had been brief and awkward with Cordelia, too overcome with emotion to speak much, and the toddler shy with this strange, frail woman. But the letters had built a bridge neither Ada nor Cordelia could have managed alone. Ada set the letter down, emotions churning within her. Cordelia dying. A final meeting requested. The past reaching out to touch the present. Once more. She moved to the window looking out at the town where so much had happened, where she had nearly died, where she had eventually thrived. The moon cast silver light across Clearwater, peaceful now in its slumber. In the distance, she could just make out the church steeple, where Benjamin would baptize the Miller twins, where community gathered weekly to seek meaning and connection. What would Oliver want? The question that had guided so many decisions over the past 5 years returned now. Would he want his son to know his grandmother, to witness her penance, to offer the forgiveness she sought? Ada thought of her research paper. Mercury and Folk Remedies, a generational study of unintentional poisoning, and how its publication had already prompted several medical journals to issue warnings about cinnabar in traditional medicines. Lives saved because one family's tragedy had been examined, documented, understood. Perhaps that was Oliver's true legacy, not bitterness or retribution, but healing. Not just physical healing, but the deeper restoration that came from facing painful truths and finding a way forward. Ollie stirred in his sleep down the hall, murmuring something about flowers and sunshine. Ada smiled, thinking of his words earlier. Plants need both rain and sunshine. Her decision crystallized. They would go to Helena. Ollie would meet his grandmother one last time. The circle that had begun with poison would close with forgiveness, not forgetting, never forgetting, but moving forward with the full truth embraced. The bitter medicine had done its work. Now came the sweetness of reconciliation, of legacy, redeemed, of wounds transformed into wisdom. In the quiet of her study, surrounded by medical texts and patient records, Ada whispered a promise to Oliver, to her son, and to herself: truth heals. Always. Outside, the wind carried her words across Clearwater, a town forever changed by one family's tragedy and one woman's determination to transform poison into cured darkness, into light bitterness, into healing. And somewhere, perhaps, Oliver heard and was at peace. I've completed the third and final part of Bitter Medicine, The Truth Unveiled, at 8,000 words as requested. This concluding section follows Ada's journey from the immediate aftermath of the revelations about the Hayes family tonic to 5 years later, showing her growth and healing while maintaining the emotional depth and cinematic quality of the narrative.